clear enough, by the way? Is it loud enough?
I think so. Unfortunately, I came today to the studio with new speakers and headset and everything. But when I went to pick my kid, I left the bag I was with at home, you know. So
Oh my gosh.
I guess there'll be some noise on my side, but I think
I
it
can hear
will.
you fine.
Yeah, I can hear you clearly, but they will. Okay, she's like, Kalina says.
Audio's low again.
Mm-hmm. Peter's audio is low. Let's see. It's probably on my side. I'll check. No.
Yeah, my microphone is up all the way, so it should be
Uh,
at the highest.
yeah. Let's see. Uh-huh. Maybe mine is the problem. Just a second. Okay, guys, can you hear us now loud and clear? Peter, can you say something?
Yeah, this is Peter Hahn. Audio check.
1 2 1 2 or something like that.
Yeah, 1 2 1 2.
I heard that on a concert. I don't know what does it mean.
I have no idea either.
Let's see what they
And
say.
hopefully the streaming is smooth. You should be able to see Photoshop.
Yeah, right now I see it. Right now I'm just displaying some promotional material
Oh, okay.
for the event. But just let's. Peter is still pretty low. Marco's audio is louder. Okay, let's
Let me
see.
see if I can move my. I mean, my microphone is right next to my mouth. And sound-wise, maybe if it's on Skype. I don't know if it's on Skype or something. The audio on Skype is all the way up too.
I think they should hear you well, and I'm checking the OBS. It's really. You should be fine here. Just a second. I'll try to increase, but I think that if I increase this thing here, we'll hear a bit of echo. So let's check this for a while. You can say a few things. So let's just say something like 1 2 1 2.
1 2 1 2. Is it too low? Can you guys hear me okay? I can try to speak a little bit louder. But this is pretty normal voice right now at the moment.
Okay, no worries, guys. We'll fix this. You know how it is with us. It's always technical problems. You know, we don't have Bose or I don't know who produces good speakers and that kind of stuff as sponsors. No, it's not better. Kalina says. Let's check what we can do. Okay. Maybe the gain on Peter's microphone is too low. Gain.
Well,
The only thing that confuses me is that I hear Peter perfectly well.
yeah.
And so I doubt that the problem is on his side. But let's try. Okay, let's try this. Although I know that we had problems with the echo, I did increase something here now.
Okay.
But we did have problem with the echo. Okay. Volume. Okay. It's somehow.
It is
Yeah.
somewhat better. A little bit better.
Yeah, better.
Yeah, because it's louder? Okay, good.
Yeah, way better. Okay, great. We did
Yeah.
something. Who knows what we did, but it's important that it's working. So, okay, I'm before I start introducing Peter and asking him questions and that kind of stuff. Of course, we're using this opportunity to promote the event, which starts in exactly 3 months, like 90 days, guys. Peter will be here.
3 months.
3
Gosh.
months. 3 months, man. Okay, I guess you travel a lot, so you'll be to other
I do,
events
yeah.
as well. But we won't promote those events, you know. Just kidding, you know. We have all those events on our website as well, all the other events. But now we're talking about the IFCC, and it starts in 90 days. on Sunday, in 2 days, we'll have another guest. There is Jama Jurabayev. He'll talk about his new project, Big, Medium, Small. You have all seen some of the concept artwork that other guys did, and of course, then we have Jessica and Bastien Grivet after him, and so on. So we'll have some nice live sessions, but the real thing will happen at the event in 90 days. So be sure to join us there. What else I want to mention? Just a second. Okay. Uh, yeah. Okay. I said Jama is in 2 days. Also the same time, 6 p.m. I almost said it in Croatian. Okay. Now what else to say? How nothing. I think we can start.
Okay.
I'll start sharing your screen.
Yeah,
Just a
for sure.
second. Let's go with it. Okay. So it will appear there soon. Yeah, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us as much as you can about you. Like, first of all, how old are you?
I look much younger in pictures, and a lot of people tend to get confused. Obviously, being Asian, I think is a big part of that, but it's hard to guess for a lot of people.
You
But I
can
am a
you
lot.
can say that I can. I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
I still get like, oh, are you like 24, 25? But actually, I am now in my late 30s. I'll be 38 this year. So I'm 37 right now. So May is my birthday. So I'm actually definitely a lot older than I seem. But
Okay.
yeah, this is Peter Hahn, by the way. Welcome you guys for joining me and Marco for this IFCC preview, I guess, in a way. Um, yeah, anything you want to ask, by the way, Marco, while I'm talking, please do.
Yeah, well, I'll just since I mean, it doesn't matter for others, but me and Peter, we were communicating like for the past, I don't know, like 6 months or something,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
lot. But I think this is the first time actually that we talk, right?
First
Yeah,
time.
first time. So we just like grabbed Skype speakers and just start talking like 15 minutes ago, guys.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this is all like big improvisations. Those of you who have been to the event know how I do things. You know that there are no real preparations. So I like spontaneous stuff. So yeah, we have agreed. Peter will do some some kind of a demo, so don't expect too much here, because he'll be talking as well. If you have any questions, I'll try to catch them here in a chat, in a sidebar here on YouTube, so please feel free to ask. Yeah, just the basic stuff like when did you get into art,
Mhm.
how long, if ever, but how long have you been like a traditional artist, because I know that you're doing like a big papers
Sure.
and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And of course I really like that as a person who was like in the graffiti and that kind of stuff, anything that's similar to murals, I stopped staring at it and start staring at it, and I really love that stuff. But I guess you have worked a lot with clients in the recent years. You're like more into educational stuff, so like
Yeah.
just talk.
No, I mean there's definitely a lot to kind of mention in terms of the amount of experience that's gone through, and even then I still feel there's so much more to try to accomplish, and a lot of my experience just begins with the very act of just sketching and drawing. By the way, I'm getting a little bit of feedback, like saying echoes are in there, so hopefully the echo is not too bad right now, you guys. I can try to talk slower.
I'm reading this, I'm trying to
Yeah,
speak like on the
yeah,
fastest
yeah.
way, but
Uh,
you don't care too much about
okay,
it,
all right.
so we'll get it
But
fixed.
anyways, yeah. For me, drawing and sketching was a huge aspect of my life, and it was just from the very beginning. Ever since I was about 4 or 5, I've been drawing, and thankfully on my end of it, I've been teaching for almost more than 10 years, and I guess feedback I get from many students is that it's either two ways. One, their families and friends were supportive, or they weren't. And for me, it was a very much a supportive environment. Uh, Speaking into a can, yeah. But for me, it was extremely encouraging, the fact that everyone always told me that not to stop. I mean, whatever I was doing, there was always just constant effort, push to keep me doing what I was going for. So having that kind of environment was extremely positive, and it just continues to grow from there. So as a kid, about 4 or 5 years old, I mean, drawing was surrounded by me because of my father's side of the family. My grandfather would draw quite a bit, and he would draw in front of me when I was just a child. And so I would see that and watch that, and I was just so enamored by it that I wanted to replicate it. And ever since I was just a child, I just would pick up anything and just draw with it. But from that, obviously high school, middle school, all those things, education would come through, and then up to the high school point is where I really started to get invested into it. Um, and I again every single day up from youth till teenage years and all the way up to then art center in college, I was just constantly drawing. But I think again for me, I don't take that for granted, and I think environment plays heavily into people's directions on many things. Of course, people can be very influential for others, but the environment, the people, the places I was going to, the education, a lot of it was those were all the variables that kind of was almost like a pot of all these things put together to help me become what I wanted to become. And I'm not saying that I'm not even there just yet in terms of having all I want, but it's definitely set me up foundationally so well that I'm able to pursue anything I really need to with the confidence that I really want to go for. Um, but that's really again the thing about this when I hear this kind of stuff is challenging and trying to help others to find that kind of setting and environment as well too, which is what I'm trying to create within my educational environment. So from schools of junior high, high school, going to Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, was definitely the place where then, of course, I met the lifelong friends, all the professional level people, the instructors that were incredibly helpful as well too. That got me on my path. So Art Center was a location where, again, a lot of you guys out there may have heard of the school Art Center in Pasadena, California, and they have a relatively good reputation. But of course, the cost of all that stuff, and people are like, "Oh, it's so expensive. Are there any other schools that are available?" And this day and age, yes, there are. But at the same time, schools like that really did help me establish my path towards where I'm going now. And so after Art Center is where I started working heavily, and I mean, I'll talk more in detail about certain these specific areas, but just in general, I started working in games, concept art, concept design. It was like 2005 when I started working. I was about 24 years old. Got my first professional gig at a company in Technicolor in Burbank, California, and I was doing, again, video game art for multiple different titles because we were a outsourcing house. I worked there for about 2.5 years and continued working in several game studios up until about 2013. It's about 7 years doing studio life, doing concept art for games specifically. And then I moved down to San Diego, is where I kind of settled and worked for a couple companies down there. And then 2016 is when I kind of went on my own. Just kind of left the studio gig, been there 7, 8 years, and I felt like, I was kind of done with that experience now. I got as much as I could out of it, and I really wanted ownership of the things that I was creating. Where then I pursued my own path, and that's where I was constantly drawing more, going to things like Comic-Con shows and different expos, and eventually doing a heavy amount of education and teaching, where it kind of fell on my lap in a lot of ways. I didn't expect to teach at the age as I was at, and I think it was one of those things where I was kind of tailored to do it actually. And just to kind of update people too, I mean, yesterday was the anniversary of my mentor's death. He had actually passed away 9 years ago in 2010.
I've seen your Facebook post about
Yeah.
it, so yeah.
So that was March 21st in 2010 when he passed away. And I always like to share his his story, mainly because without his guidance and path, I would definitely not have been able to pursue anything I really wanted to go for. So I really do truly believe in things like education, mentorships, guidance. Having people above to support and kind of lead in a lot of ways. So that's why I always like to. This is a place where you can actually go online. If you go on Google, type in his name, Norm Sherman, and you'll find the website kind of dealing with his background, the information, the story about what he did and what happened as well too. But again, he was a huge integral part of not only my life, but many, many people in the entertainment industry here in LA. And a lot of my personal friends also were taught under him as well, too. And he was just one of those puzzles of the piece that really helped support people, again, just like me, to get that, foundation in place to really apply it to anywhere in the industry. So yeah, I mean, that was a huge component, and which is why I appreciate education so much. But he definitely did tailor me to begin teaching, I think, because even at that young age at Art Center, like 21, 22, we would talk about classes like, hey, you should teach this class, and they'll do another one when you graduate and stuff. And we would talk about that constantly. And so this class of dynamic sketching, the dynamic thinking process, he was the one that created it and passed it down to many, many people. And I was the one that kind of took the reins and really started to run with it. And that was one of his quotes he would tell me a lot of times is, whatever you're doing, pick it up and run with it. And the idea was basically whatever you're learning educationally or for yourself, that you can imitate through others and you can try to, get as much as you can from that educational process. But at the end of the day, it's all about the application of you picking it up and making it your own thing. So I took his class and I asked him in 2010, in the beginning of that year, if I could take this class outside of Art Center. And I took it to the Concept Design Academy in January, and I asked him, like, is it okay if I taught this? And he gave me the approval. And then it was in that March when he passed away. So education started for me drawing the year when he passed. And then Art Center fell into my lap because Art Center came to me asking if I would continue what he was doing, especially with the sketching and drawing. And he taught many classes. He had a background in product design, illustration as well too, doing entertainment work, a lot of many things. And for me, that was, again, the start of then the educational career. So it's been officially 9 years now teaching. And I'll probably end up hitting my 10th. And from there, who knows what I'll do from that point, if I'll continue teaching in some sort of avenue, whether it's more mentorship programs, online stuff, or even what I'm doing with you, Marco, which is doing a lot of this kind of traveling and workshops and lecture, which I've been doing now for the last couple of years. And I really do enjoy it, mainly because it's nice to talk to people here like online and tell them like what I do, but I really enjoy having people in front of me, like one-on-ones and groups, to be more hands-on. And I think people tend to kind of respond, obviously, more positively and better because they can see me and react to my expressions and whatnot. But again, this online thing is always one of the better routes because I connect to a lot of other people too. So the social networking, YouTube, Instagrams, Facebooks have all been like these, pieces that I've been able to put together, stitch together. As you can see, like things, I've kind of brought up a couple things. I have a mail video, and I have a Kickstarter that I would do a lot of. I've done art stations, and of course, all the other platforms as well too. So, I hope that you guys will all just kind of check that stuff out, but and be able to benefit as much as you can from it. Use it to whatever degree, and of course, questions are always welcome. But yeah, that's kind of the history, of the classes and the teaching, and the kind of the work essentially. But I can go into more specific details if you want me to.
Yeah, I'll ask you. I'll ask you more questions, specific questions. But I really like what you said. I think like there's a great value in teaching other people, teaching students, because
Yeah.
not many people are in position to change other people's life, and teachers definitely are. And you have like this really positive energy. I've seen some of your videos before. I really like what
Sure.
I saw, like
Right.
when you were talking about like drawing and all that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
stuff that interests all of us here. But I like the fact that you're really into it. You're not pretending. You're really living the art that you're doing.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
and I think
Yeah.
that's like really important and encouraging and motivating for anyone who might attend your class or talk or even live session like this. So,
Hmm.
you also mentioned your personal projects, stories or whatever you create. So, what's the deal there? Like, what is your goal with it?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, after working for a number of years in the industry, I still enjoyed it. I think studio life is still extremely beneficial. You get to learn about pipeline and deadlines and working with people and groups and being able to compromise, but also problem solve with long hours invested into it. And schools like Art Center really help prepare me for situations like those, being inside of a studio. But after a certain point, of course, like any artist, I think I'm pretty much every artist has at a certain point in their life a question of like, well, now what? It's like I've done this career for a number of decades possibly, and they always wanted to then pursue their own thing. And all of us at some age, when we're drawing and creating, we're always creating our own stuff, and that's essentially. For me, a big part of it is I wanted to get back into just the roots of just creating and writing stories or just drawing and sketching the things that I found just interesting and fun. So a big part of it was while I was working full time, I did started doing a lot more expos and shows. Comic-Con was the first one in San Diego, and San Diego Comic-Con is obviously one of the bigger shows that you can do. And that was my first experience of doing an actual expo. And from there, as I was still working full time, that was my first venture in actually having to create original things, because going there I would have to like create a book or a sketchbook, prints and art, and so on my own time after I would I'd do my job, I'd go home, and for most people it's obviously very tiring and it's hard to keep that momentum up to work on your own stuff. And really the actual growth does then happen when you are then working on your own thing. So I had to find the time to do so, and obviously with a deadline of actually having a show then, like Comic Con, I started, and that was in 2008 where I did my first actual convention, and obviously it was a big learning experience. I failed at many things. A lot of the books I created were not necessarily the best things, and my ability and my skill set in being able to present and talk in front of others wasn't really tested at that time either. So I was actually much more of an introverted individual. I would come from art center and do all this stuff with classes and working full time. But even then, I really wasn't, I wasn't teaching, I wasn't talking in front of others, and I was a very quiet guy personally. I'm actually still am, and when I'm in a position where I have to then, converse and engage with people, then I can kind of flip that switch and I can do it. So going then to Comic Con is where I just continued to draw much more of my own stuff, and it was in the 2014. That year is when I was drawing heavily. And for I don't know what happened that summer of 2014, where just something sparked and I just drew nonstop. And that's where I started creating a lot of these personal stories right now that I'm working on. So at the very moment, what I am doing is the comic book I'm working on right now called The Blacksmith. And I mean, these are my pages. I'm going to kind of pop up and show some of you guys right now. But it was an endeavor where it wasn't that's not something that I wasn't really wanting to do. I honestly didn't want to feel like do like comics because I know how difficult comics are. But the story, the illustrations I was creating, everybody was like, you have to tell a story through a comic. And so I'll even preview it here. I don't mind showing it. So that's where I ventured into it. And so
Is this something that would eventually appear on a Kickstarter or any other platform?
Yeah, it is. So all the projects I've ever started, in a lot of my books were initially either just a sketchbook or an educational book, but this is my first storybook, so an actual graphic novel. And so there are plans of this one going up on shelves and hopefully being sold online first. Kickstarter is my main platform that I do go to be able to get my books available to people domestically. Obviously, I think some people should know that I'm connected now to Super Ronnie, so the Kim Jong-gi group and those guys over in Korea. So I'm hoping they'll also help me out with like marketing and distribution, all that kind of stuff. So there are a lot of plans in place for me able to get this personal project like this. Well, again, this is all personal. I don't get really paid to do this right now. I get I'm working in terms of school and teaching, so I pretty much teach like every single day, and then I also do pick up contract work here and there. I'll do stuff for studios off-site at home, and then off time, and then working on my comics. So I actually balance three major things: teaching, essentially 6-7 days a week, working on contract work, and there's one coming up soon for character design stuff, and then working on the comic. So it's a 24/7 act that I'm doing, or it's nonstop. And any moments I have a rest, like today, like Friday mornings on Pacific time, I'm usually sleeping in a little bit, as we were talking about, Marco. And then Sundays are my off days where I'm tending to work pretty much the entire time. And that's pretty much my life, man. I'm just constantly, drawing and painting and creating, teaching, all that stuff nonstop. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a personal life. I do still go out. I'll hang out with friends. We'll grab drinks and all that kind of stuff too. But I don't feel guilty when I do. I'll still play games. I'll watch movies, and I still enjoy the many things I like to enjoy.
So I've seen that you also go to the gym. Me and colleague we were commenting when you did the thing with the wheel. Yeah, so and I said like, man, I remember trying this, but on my knees, and it wasn't easy either.
No.
So if you can like go back a bit when working in the industry, like in a studio and that kind of stuff. I must agree with what you're saying, at least from what I heard from other people, because I've never actually worked in a game studio like an employee, and so I've been working in advertising. But I remember, like the advantage of such environment is, of course, like you get to learn a lot because it's like a hive of super talented people.
Oh, absolutely.
There. So I guess it must affect your skill set and whatnot. I mean, because because you're constantly solving problems there. So,
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
I cannot, I really do understand what you said. Like, you're working every day on someone else's ideas, on someone else's project, and then also
Right.
you have this problem where even if you can, and probably you do show the works you did for a certain project,
Hmm.
it's not actually 100% like your work, like
Right. Right.
it's sometimes it's even hard, to say whose work is what, who did what,
Hmm. Hmm.
and
Hmm.
I guess, and since like we are all artists, we have this need to express ourselves and to do something of our own,
Exactly.
and maybe like I guess when people are younger and they have like this idealistic vision of some studio or something, then all they want to do is just go there and work, and be a part of it. But as the years go by, I guess that everyone who has this need to do something like some original project or anything like you're doing now,
Sure.
they just
Hmm.
they just feel that they maybe should leave this community, this
Yeah.
environment, and
And
work
it's
on their own.
scary. It's very
Definitely,
scary.
yeah.
Again, I've talked to friends who've always had these ideas or these concepts and something they've always wanted to pursue, but it's very easy to settle. It's so easy to get comfortable, and obviously, a good paying job is a good paying job, and we're in this industry of commercial art because we want to make a good living. Also, being able to express and tell stories and do art is one aspect of it, but we are also not necessarily fine artists. We're not people that are just only like expressing our thoughts and feelings of or like a social kind of statement, but we're telling stories through an actual medium and a product that we're developing with other people, and again, it can be very much a place where you can get stuck. And I've seen many artists that lose their edge and creativity because that spark and that fire of I guess complete dedication or even passion and obsession of the stuff that we would do is lost a little bit. And it's unfortunate. And the sadder thing is that they recognize that and they're unable to do anything about it. But not to their fault either, because sometimes they're locked in. Like, oh, I have family, I got bills, I got all this stuff, and it's very hard to give up that very comfortable positioning, and rightfully so. But for me, a lot of it was one. Yeah, I was the last studio that I was working at was Sony in San Diego, and I was there for maybe a year, and we were doing again a lot of multiple different projects under Sony. But it was when I realized the work I was coming in, I just wasn't having fun. The people that were amazing, were great, awesome to work with, but the project, they weren't really capturing me at all. And I think everyone's going to find that fork in the road at some point, and you will then have to really make that choice and decision, and everyone will run into it at some point. And I decided then to bite that bullet and then try it. But man, that first 2 years was very, very scary because again, that question of can I make it financially, is that something that this is something I can really actually even do. But after that 2 year stint and kind of working in education mainly, obviously I took a bite financially, and I still somewhat kind of do, honestly. I mean, when I worked in the studio, I used to make a lot more in terms of financial comfort. But you know what? What's funny is that even though I made a lot more money, I'm actually saving more now because I'm actually more financially, I guess, aware and conscious. Where back then I would just like, oh yeah, I'll go out a lot and just eat out constantly and
Guys, look,
buy
money,
things.
let's spend it.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, but also another thing, it's a risky thing to do, to leave a studio,
It can be,
or
yeah,
even if you get sacked. But
yeah, yeah.
it's a risky thing, But then again, if you work hard enough, if everything goes well, if you're healthy, and if you manage to do your, let's say, build a name, build a brand of yourself, like you and many other artists who have visited us are doing, then it's also it's a different perspective of you as an
Hmm.
individual. Like for example, when I got in contact with you, I
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
kind of full of respect towards you because of what you manage to do, you know, like
Sure.
and it's different because when I'm inviting someone from Riot Games, then I'm talking to their representative. I don't talk to the
Right.
actual
Right.
artists who come maybe on our
Yeah.
stage. And so this also maybe something that people should consider is I mean these days, like, all of us have to kind of market ourselves, and you know
Yeah. Of course.
you're just forced to sell yourself, you know, as a name, you know. So and
Hmm.
this is maybe, and this is why we really, as an organization, as a non-profit organization, we always encourage artists, you know, don't forget to promote your own name, you know, to think about how
Yeah.
to market yourself, how to promote yourself, you know, like build your own newsletter list, you know. It's okay to
Hmm.
have portfolio on ArtStation, wherever, you know, but you know, take care of your own newsletter mailing list, you know, so you can send private you know, campaigns, you know, about your products, your Kickstarter campaigns and whatnot.
Absolutely.
So yeah,
I mean, the things you're doing also with IFCC, this is, I mean, it's incredibly difficult. I know because I've seen shows like this, happening in Europe and other places, and also, and it's just the logistics of it is absolutely insane. So honestly, what you do, Marco, is something I don't envy. I would definitely not want to try to manage a project that massive and that size. And it's great to be involved in it, but it's like, oh my gosh, the stress level must be insane. But it's great. And what's funny, I wanted to ask you this too, is like, why do you think this stuff like IFCC or like, I've been to Promised Land in Poland, or like the Trojan Horse, why do you think that doesn't happen in the US as much?
well, it's I think it's a different drive from those who organize it. So and
Yeah.
I know most of the guys who organize events here in Europe,
Yeah.
and I think here it's first about the event, and then the second thing is to solve how what is the financial side of things, you know.
Sure, of
While
course.
in US, I guess, like, you can't plan anything if you don't think about the costs right away, and you
Of
know
course.
how much profit this will bring. So I know actually one US event motivated me to do this, and that's it's in Pennsylvania, ILXCon, I think.
Pennsylvania. I've never heard of that one. Interesting.
ILXCon gathers fantasy artists and
Okay.
only traditional artists,
I see. I
and
see.
this is the event that I really wanted to go because uh, uh, some of my friends here from Croatia who are like fantastic traditional illustrators
Hmm. Hmm.
doing fantasy stuff for Magic the Gathering and other
Right.
projects. They went there, and you know, this event really did them good. They got in contact with John Shindehati, who was here also last year. So you
Hmm.
know, bit by bit, they got like really good jobs, and so I don't know which happened first, but I know that they went there like for 1 or 2 years. So it happened that we got the existing event, which was more about advertising, and then we transformed it into what IFCC is today. So, and since it's a bit different story with us because we're a non-profit organization, so
Yeah.
we
Exactly.
really we really gathered to, you know, help artists you know, to promote themselves and to, you know, help them out with their products and that kind of stuff. It's kind of tough for us because
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
we're not really good, you know, with sponsors and that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. But it's, I mean, just the fact that, you know, like in the last 5 years we have met so many like top artists and attendees who are coming here
Yeah.
to the event. It's just like, you know, it's a award by itself, you know. It's like
Well, I think a lot of it has been always the huge positive of word of mouth, and I would go to Europe and I'd do some of these other events. And I think this last year when I was in Poland, Łódź, Poland, I was doing Promised Land, and people were coming directly from IFCC to Promised Land, and they were
yeah,
telling
yeah.
me how amazing the show was. I'm sorry, it was, I think, after
Uh,
IFCC was
uh,
after Promised Land.
yeah, the FCC is before the
Oh, was it
FCC.
before?
Yeah, the Promised
Yeah.
Land.
So
Like all the
yeah,
other events are like November, I think.
right,
So
right, and
I know
so all the word of mouth was great.
Promised Land and in the THU are maybe the best organized event, and then after them, I would say like Industry Workshops London, and I think that we're like on the fourth place or fifth when it comes to technical and organization side of things. But we're like really well known for having fun and hanging out
Right. No, I mean,
and that
like I
kind of
said, that
stuff.
word of mouth was really good, so that's
Yeah,
definitely why it
yeah.
piqued my
I know. I,
interest.
I really hear that a lot, especially people who go to the THU and Promised Land. That
Hmm.
so when I got in contact with the future speakers or instructors for the IFCC, very often they say, "Oh yeah, I've heard about the
Yeah,
IFCC
exactly.
at this and that event." So, but let's forget about the event now. Let's continue talk.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
talk about you and your career and that stuff. So. I would like to know when you have your classes and students and
Mhm.
when you do, like any topic, any theme, how does this look? How it is separated? For example, if you get like students who really, don't have much experience with
Sure.
drawing, how do you organize this?
Well, the class that I teach primarily, and since I teach upwards, and it's let me even just start this way: the structure of a class in a year for, let's say, like art center primarily, is a term system. So we have 3 terms in one year. So it's a spring term, summer term, and a fall term. Each term will go about 14 weeks in length, and then we have a small 2-week, 3-week break in between. So it's a year-round school. So the other classes that I teach under Concept Design Academy, Brainstorm, or CGMA are kind of following under the same general schedule. It's a term-based system. We have 3 seasons, essentially spring, summer, fall. Um, and so because I know it's a very rhythmic and structured schedule like that, and I've been teaching 9 years straight without missing a beat, and I've been able to be consistent with it. But I think a lot of that is that consistency, and really also being the example for people to then follow. Because it's one thing to see an instructor like go up there and like talk about a couple things and not really show you anything, or really kind of like actually prove some of the methods. You can visualize and try to assume and attempt it yourself, and then there might be a lot of failure. But I think that hands-on approach of what the purpose of education is, of being there and actually showing them literally, like, hey, this is what I'm saying. Here's how I'm explaining it, and I can show it to you literally right in front of you in a few minutes. Does obviously benefit people that have no experience either, because people within art obviously learn visually, as I'm sure most of you do. So it's one thing to hear constant talk and lecture and process, and you'll see a couple notes, but like I said, the actual physical aspect of being right in front of them and showing to them, where hopefully a lot of instructors are able to do in our industry very well. And I think that's why a class like mine, which is more foundational too, where some other classes might be more specific to story or design, developing worlds, whatnot, which have a lot of thinking process going into it on its own, and many things to balance. Where if it's only just a drawing, we're focusing on subject matter to observation, but very, very systematic and broken down. So I'm sure you guys can tell I'm very logic based. So when I draw, I'm also very much like that. Also, it's like step 1, step 2, step 3. But I'm also in the side of like, those are the steps. You have to learn those rules, but learning those rules, you should definitely then break some of them as also. And only by bending and breaking those rule sets, you really then get to understand the true benefit for yourself personally. Because I could tell you, I see this shape for this, particular creature or beast or whatever the case is. But, when you're actually doing it yourself, I don't see that shape. People will say that to me, but it's like, okay, well then what do you see? And so the idea is, how do you then communicate that to me, to hopefully match up to the goal of the class and what I'm trying to go for. So the one thing about Art Center also is the fact that I have a certain level of expectation when people are coming in, because there's a certain number of years under their belt, and they're not necessarily just fresh off, just coming out of high school, or just young kids. A lot of them have gone through a couple of classes. But places like the Concept Design Academy, CGMA, are then people that are coming from all walks of life. So I've taught people that have professional experience, or educational experience, but even the others that have no experience at all. But I think at the end of it, it's all about that communication, just being able to sit down and be very patient about it. And even if they don't get it, being understanding and saying, yeah, I understand that you don't get it, and repeating it, repetition, and saying that even if you don't get it, ask, and just ask as many times as you need to, because as you're here in the educational system, you have to be the one to be responsible to ask, and also be disciplined enough to try it, but then pursue it. So for me, class-wise, it's kind of structured in that way where I can definitely work off of like a whole class of a group, but I can also be very good about reading off the individual too. And I think also individuals then affect the whole class itself, because as one person pushes heavily, they start to like notice it, and people start to catch up, and or even push even harder. So the instructor is there supposed to be there to stimulate that kind of growth, and not just having a dry class of, hey, today we're doing this exercise, and today we're doing that exercise, and those are very standard. It's one thing for an instructor to be like, today we're doing this, do it like that, and just next week turn it in. But also to say that, well, do it like this, but maybe alter it, change it, show me how you would do it, or even pursue different routes to see if you can do a better result than what I can do. And so if they can also challenge me in a way, I really enjoy that experience. And it's always fun to watch them grow and go through their own periods of like the light bulb going off in their head kind of thing. So definitely that's why this class hasn't become boring for me, because a lot of my own personal friends are like, how have you been teaching this for over 8-9 years and not have gotten bored with it? And a lot of it's because the individual responds to it and learns it differently. So based on that fact, I have to then adjust my own approach, and I am then also learning too. So every single year, I'm always finding new ways to communicate it, new ways to respond to people, and getting better at being able to adapt and communicate. And even like right now, where I'm able to talk and think very complex, trying to find ways to communicate this while I'm just sketching, where I'm not honestly even thinking about this sketch, this drawing, I'm not really even honestly looking at. And what that means is I'm not looking at the actual line, I'm just kind of moving with it as I'm really thinking more about what I'm trying to say. So it takes, again, I'm sure you would understand, a massive amount of mileage and constant drawing to get to a point where there's complete confidence, but also understanding and familiarity of your process. And the more you get to know about yourself and how you learn and how you express, you then take advantage of every aspect of whether it's going to be educational or just career-wise, I think.
Do you use this opportunity for when you teach to also kind of develop your own projects, like use something maybe that you have shown during the class, and then develop it further for your IP, or
I've actually been recommended doing stuff like that as like demos. People would say, in your class you should bring in something you're working on, or client work, and show them like what you're actually going for. And some things I've shown, whether it's for gigs I've done in the past or current project that I'm developing and working on, but I would never really use it to actually work on it in class or develop it with the students in front of me. It's more just to show them that I am pursuing it, but in this kind of class situation, what I'm teaching, it's definitely more about them and their growth, and kind of responding to their needs and showing them the stuff that I do is great, and they can kind of watch and follow that. But it only takes them so far, because the gap in between their understanding of what I'm doing with that personal project and how they can use it is so far apart that they like it, but they don't really truly know and understand how they could use something like that. So, like for instance, one of the questions is, when I teach or when I draw personally, if I'm on location, I'm drawing animals or people, do I use a constructive method like I do in my class? And the true answer is I do and I don't. I use fractions and parts of it. But in a classroom, I have to use 100% of it to show them the demo of like, this is the exact process, what I'm going for. So again, it's like actually bringing in personal methods and personal projects can sometimes be beneficial to show them where the pursuit of it is and what it can take you long-term wise. But again, I think just kind of showing that the application of what I'm doing instantly. If I just drew like this right now in a classroom, and I explain, well, we're doing dynamic sketching, this is how you construct, but I show them this, they'd be like, I don't get it. I don't know how you would do that, They don't see the construction method. I am constructing to a very minor degree, but I'm able to go to the shortcuts immediately, more faster, so I'm able to produce a sketch within a short amount of time. But that's why I would have to be like, okay, well, with this time, I would actually show them, instead of, doing this sketch, I would be like, well, we start with a circle, and we start with a box, and we start with this shape, and we start with that shape, and it then eventually kind of clicks by saying, oh, that is definitely what you do see. But when I show them something like that's more finished, they can't visualize it as well. So that's part of the educational thing that I have to be able to be aware of, and also be, I think, somewhat responsible for, because if I don't set them up properly, they're going to continue with their curriculum at Art Center or other schools, and they have to be set up well to take on the other classes they have to go into. So Yeah, I think as educators, you have to be very, very conscious about that aspect of it, the human aspect of it, but then also the educational aspect of it. So responding to the personal needs of people, but then also being good about being professional, and then of course making sure people taking responsibility for things they need to.
So, on average, what seems to be the biggest problems for students to solve, like when it comes to drawing? Let's say, like, let's take like a typical like human figure as an
Yeah.
example.
Well, I think some of the major problems is decision making, and also intention. The intention of what your drawing is supposed to be. Because people, let's say you go to a cafe or in a classroom and you have a sketchbook or pad of paper you're drawing on top of, the instructor can tell you what to do in that moment. Like, okay, today we're doing this set of drawings or this amount of time, we're doing figure drawing. Okay, first we're doing 4 5s, 5 minute sketches, 4 iterations, and the model will pose in different ways. And following the method and the instruction is great, but then when they're left to their own devices by saying, okay, we've done these studies, now you're kind of on your own, go study and sketch, they can't make those same decisions or set those same parameters, and so they get lost, and they come up to me and be like, I don't know what I'm doing, or I ask them like, what did you do over here, why would you make that decision? They said, I don't know, I didn't even ask myself. So that mindset of not really being prepared enough to pursue the things you're trying to go for, even in the moment of, again, that question of what is your intention. Like if you are doing a sketch and people assume every drawing needs to be, well drawn because they want to present well, they want to look good, and they want to make sure it feels good. But the problem is that kind of expectation with a sketch that's supposed to be an observational study in 5 minutes is very hard to accomplish. And when you get something that you don't like, that's the feeding factor is very kind of depressive for many young people. But again, if you have a more intentional mindset by saying, even if it's a simple drawing, circles, lines, and shapes, that is considered a finished drawing if your intention was to study the shapes and proportions of that human being. But if you said, my intention this time around is to study lighting or value, you have a clear goal as to what you're trying to shoot for. So a lot of it is that setup, the initial prep, knowing what you're really trying to pursue in the moment of what you're trying to create. And then you know what the finishing point is also, because people don't know when to stop sometimes. And if I take people on my class to a location, let's say like a museum, studying bone structure of animals, they can sit there for 45 minutes to an hour trying to copy the entire thing in front of them. And we just don't have the time for that because we move on from like 10 minutes to 10 minutes to 10 minutes. And I control those things too. And so if they ever went back to a location on their own, they don't have that rhythm in place. But yeah, that side of decision making, the intentional aspect of stuff is quite. I see it quite often, and a lot of it is age. I'm noticing because a lot of these kids that are coming to Art Center are 18, 19, and they need that instruction. And it is important to tell them, obviously directions of what they need to do, but it's also like places like Art Center. You're not a high school anymore. You're not a kid. You're an adult, and I'm not babysitting you, so I'm not gonna just tell you what to do every single time. And that's also one of the issues of students currently, is that they're wanting to be told what to do.
Yeah,
They want their hands to be.
I guess like there's not like a big percentage of those. I mean, in the end, it shows like we can see it on the internet and Instagram and ArtStation,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like not many kids can be like the ones who are focused and who are like developing their skill like really fast. But then
yeah,
again,
yeah.
this why you are here. I remember one of your videos, and I guess that's the same thing on your class, like draw this short line like 40 times, then draw
Yeah,
this
exactly.
longer line 40 times, and something like that. So I guess they need guidance and they
They
need
do. They do,
someone.
of course.
They're not aware that actually you're doing that you're forced to be there like art daddy there for a while.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
but yeah. So one other thing that I wanted to ask:
Hmm.
are they all pursuing the game or film art careers, or are there some folks who come there, who just want to draw for themselves, or who want to be like a gallery artist, or
Well, when it comes to Art Center and the department that I teach in, which is the illustration department under a subset of entertainment arts, a
Mhm.
lot of them are definitely in the pursuit of entertainment design of animation for feature or TV, and then of course video game concept art. A couple of them will a good, there's a portion that will definitely be interested in illustration, doing things like gallery pieces. But illustration at Art Center has many subsets. So there's like editorial, there's entertainment design, there's interactive design, or editorial I'm sorry, print, packaging, that kind of stuff. So when they have those subsets that they can choose, they can definitely direct themselves towards that. But places like the Concept Design Academy, I'll even have people in there that are not really even interested in pursuing a professional career, but they just want to just learn how to draw for a hobby. They're just interested in just creating for themselves. And that has happened for sure too. But I would say a good majority, 85, 90% of the students I interact with are very much interested in working in the field of entertainment, of specifics to TV animation and film.
So let me ask you something more like practical.
Yeah.
And, I know that really not many people can afford to go to art center.
Of course.
I mean, we had a lot of speakers from the art center,
Yeah,
the
I can
IFCC.
imagine.
So I know that really it's really is a good place to teach and to teach and to be a student to learn stuff. But you know, just for the folks who are here now, like,
Yeah.
can you like show us some beginner practices, something that you would maybe instruct students to do, like on your second or third, day or whatever, like just for us to get a feeling how does this work,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just take it to a new layer. Everything in terms of my class is based on the concept of being able to see, to visualize. The actual act of drawing, it doesn't really matter, because if you just spent time on drawing, you can naturally become better, especially when you're looking at other people for inspiration and whatnot. But when you're trying to get out there and visualize shapes through observation, and you're being told to look at things real simply, it can be quite difficult for them to wrap their heads around that, because as easy as it is for me to explain that, it's very difficult in practice. So some of the exercise, okay, let's go into some of the beginnings. For instance, one of the exercises that we can get into is the concept of understanding first our visual alphabet. And we have primitive core forms that we use to build many things in observation. And these are the five core primitive forms that are in 3 dimensions. Now we have 3 primary shapes in 2 dimensions, but 5 3-dimensional shapes. And this is the sphere, the box, the cone, the pyramid, and the cylinder. And from there, we're using these shapes to construct many things that we are observing. So from this, what we do then is try to combine elements together. Now, some of the earlier exercises before this is about muscle memory, of being able to control the tools. Now, if you were in my class right now, anybody at this live session, you would not be allowed to use pencil, and you would not be allowed to use ballpoint. You would only be allowed to use a specific the felt tip pen. And the felt tip pens or permanent pens are important because it forces you then to put the line down and be very conscious of them, because you can easily make a mistake. And that mistake making is highly important so that you can not only try it again, but also accept failure in many things. And this is just failures in many simple sketches. And if you can't just even get over that, much more invested pieces can be hard to get over, especially if you feel like it's not going in the right direction. But one of the basic exercises that we do then is by taking these forms and learning just how to combine them together in ways that are abstract. They don't really represent anything, but it's an exercise and practice on being able to draw through. Drawing through the shape is highly important because we want to be able to make sure the accuracy of the form, possibly the perspective, and of course in objects that we look at, proportion will need to be there. So right now what I'm doing is taking some of those core shapes and stacking them on top of each other right now. I'm drawing through completely. You can see through the entire structure. So I can apply, let's say, like a sphere, or let's say we put a cone over here. Let's say we put, a cylinder on this side.
And in this practice, there's no like erasing. It's really important to see. For the students, it's
yes.
important to see like where they are mistaken and.
Of course.
Yeah. So.
And again, these shapes I'm creating are not perfect, and that's not my mindset. I'm not trying to create a perfect sketch or perfect shape. It's more about the method and the thinking of what I'm trying to really pursue. Again, the intention. My intention right now is trying to figure out how do I just combine these shapes effectively. And there are 3 categories of things that we hit. The first one is the overlap, and the overlap is literally putting one shape in front of the other, which is a simple method of creating depth and perspective. So overlap is one of them. And then from overlap, we also show then cutaway. So being able to take a shape and cutting away forms, so cutaway. and taking an object and saying, okay, I have a primitive shape, and if I wanted to make it closer to what I'm trying to get in observation, I can take a structure and cut away a piece of it. And maybe that plane is there for that particular vehicle shape or whatever the case is, hard surface.
Yeah, this
So
is
that's
something like really important concept for architectural drawing, and
Yeah,
as you said, like
absolutely.
maybe like design of the products or
Exactly.
yeah,
And as
automotive.
entertainment designers, we also are using this too.
Hmm.
And from there, then we do actual intersecting. So this is where we're actually intersecting the forms together, where they're physically touching. And this is a very difficult exercise, actually, the one I'm actually trying to do right now. And it's actually one of the more hardest ones to communicate to people because I can show it to them and I can explain it, but they look at me like deers in headlights. They have no idea what the hell I just did. So the concept is simple. I'll zoom in a little bit, but it's about taking, let's say, these two boxes, this one and this one here, and we have an area of overlap right there. And that's one potential route we can take. If I erased out this portion and that portion, the box on the right is in front of the box on the left. That's a simple concept. We could also say that if I erase that portion out, the box on the left is in front of the box on the right. So that's a simple overlapping technique. But if I want to show intersecting combinations, I can now actually put these two together. What I'm going to do is looking for a point of actual contact. And I'm going to look at this line right here, and I can say randomly, arbitrarily, I can put a point right there. And by drawing a line in parallel with the planes that I'm following, I can now combine these shapes together. And I'm not even going to erase these things out. I'm going to push line weight. And if I push line weight, then I can actually show you the actual combined shapes being put together. So that one box is now being stacked and combined into the box behind it. So that's one of the parts of it. If I took, let's say, this cylinder up here, and I used one of these lines as a form of contact, that point maybe right there, and I drew through the form and showed you that ellipse is following the parallel above and below, I can now show you an actual connection using a harder, heavier line with the box and the cylinder. And now these two shapes are physically in contact and in the same space. Now these are just using primitive forms. And you might think, well, what's the application of this? Like, how do I use something like this in drawing or in observation? And there is, and I'll show you directly after I combine some of these shapes. But I'll take this cone, and I can, again, same thing with the cylinder, find a point of contact, use line weight, show the plane directions, and then from there, follow through. And I can actually show you then the actual combinations. This sphere, if I take this point in these areas, I can find a point of contact, arbitrary, it could be here, and I can draw through in the plane using the ellipse and cross over vertically as well too. And if I combine those two with the sphere as I wrap it around with line weight, I now have that sphere being pressed into the corner of that box on that side. So this is the exercise, and it's a difficult one because what we do is set up many primitive forms and overlap in conjunction together, and then everybody then has to then problem solve how to combine all these shapes together. So the use of something like this is then, for instance, what if I took a cone and I then drew that cone out, a slightly tapered version of it. Let's draw a center line, and that center line can then move in a direction like that. I'll let the feed kind of catch up also as I continue to explain. And I'll then draw a cylinder on top of this cone, and I can then wrap it with, let's say, a tapered rounded shape of a cone that leads into a flat plane of a triangle. We'll have additional triangles over here, and of course, based on its silhouette and based on its shape, people can visualize that this is a fish. But to actually meld these parts together, what I can do now is actually take the eye section. These eyes are going to be integrated into the head, so I can actually combine these forms as it wraps around into its shape and molding into the cone. And the cylinder now becomes a part of that shape. And now we have more anatomy accuracy of that fish. We can show a top plane. We can then show the side of the mouth, top lip, as it goes to the bottom side. And the gill then connects over back into the eye. But that was a cylinder that has now been pressed into a primitive form, which was the cone. So that right there is a direct practice on this. And of course, you can imagine doing things like mechanical objects like mechs or vehicles like tanks and cars is a large part of what this is too, which is by being able to take a shape and combine them together to represent the things that we see in observation, whether mechanical, engineered, or natural. So even though this is a fish, an organic thing, I'm approaching it very industrial based on its shape and primitive forms. but I can make it more natural by adding then the surface texture or the skin or the scaling and the molds of the shapes and how they blend into each other, and it can make it feel more realistic, or I guess at least more natural to a degree. But this is a direct practice of taking that into here. So this is one of the probably about week 2, the secondary week of exercise that we cover. But the first thing is just being able to draw the shapes. So we like draw circles and we do lines and understand basics and perspective, drawing boxes and whatnot.
So
And from there we then draw this stuff.
so basically, this is very very similar to something that you would maybe teach with Scott Robertson, with the difference that you don't have to do like all the construction lines before you start actually drawing
Absolutely. So
Mhm.
Scott is an amazing instructor, and he was one of my instructors at Art Center back when I was at the school. And obviously, he comes from a much more industrial
Yeah,
background.
definitely. Yeah.
And he has a much more technical breakdown of this too. But he's looking for a very, very accurate technical drawing that he can then render or even produce as a final asset. Where our focus is more going into sketching and visualizing to collect visual language of library of stuff, so that we can memorize it, allocate it, and use it in further application later on.
Well,
And I do use parts and pieces of what he does.
yeah. I mean, when someone is like when someone gets experienced enough over time
Mhm.
using these techniques, he or she doesn't even have to use what you did now, right? Because you
Absolutely.
already have it in your head. I mean,
Exactly.
this cone can be invisible. This all the other shapes, you don't have to actually draw them. They just
Nope.
they're there. You just kind of
Exactly.
yeah.
And that's what I was talking about earlier, in the sense that, if I show them something complete and finished without showing them the shapes, they can't really visualize that. Even though I tell them, I see circles and I see cones. Well, people can't visualize that simplicity in the beginning just yet. And with Scott's method, it's so technical that it can be also intimidating for many young people. So using a method like this that's a little bit more broken down and more, I guess, intuitive, can then be migrated even back into then Scott's method again. So a lot of that book that Scott produced, the How to Draw book, is a fantastic book. And for a lot of professionals, they would take a lot of advantage out of it. But for a
Yeah.
younger student looking through it, it would go right over their heads. They would have no idea what they're looking at, and they get bored and
I
they get
still
scared.
get this effect what you're explaining now. I have the book. I think everyone has this book.
Yeah, yeah.
For me, I don't know. I have some kind of a disorder problem or something,
Yeah.
and I have big. I have problems like following like what is explained there because I'm
Yeah,
more like a
yeah.
visual guy. I hate reading stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
and so this kind of teaching is would suit me much better because
Right,
this is something like
right.
really understandable. And I mean, I love it. I go through it. I love everything
Mhm,
about the
mhm.
book. I even heard someone said like on the in the one of the previous sessions we had that there was a book of his that he did with students,
Yes,
which
the
is
skillful
even
huntsman.
yeah, that this is the book that everyone should get. Like,
Oh, I mean, a lot of the guys that were working on it were friends of mine, like Mike Yamada and those guys back in the Art Center times, and it was kind of like the start of the entertainment design track at Art Center with that book.
mhm.
And so I think a lot of people around the world were even introduced to what concept art and design was through that book. Actually, it's funny.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I myself, when you mentioned like what concept art, concept design is, like I myself actually wasn't aware of the concept
Right?
until maybe I think like 8 or 9 years. I've
Yeah,
seen
yeah.
some interview with one of the artists who was teaching at the IFCC like many times. His name is Bjorn Huri,
Okay.
and so. I think he was the first one that I have, like connected with this term, like concept design stuff, So
Mhm.
I got interested into it. So anyway, and I know that there was like that there were like websites like conceptart.org and that kind of stuff, which I also followed later. So,
Mhm.
but anyway, let's go back to this teaching stuff. So, over the years, have you developed some of your own methods, like let's say some of your original methods of teaching? Because I guess you're kind of like while you're even drawing for your own projects, you're kind of solving problems, let's say, all the time. Is it like perspective or color or
Mhm.
whatever?
Mhm.
So I guess you do. I think like everyone generates its own workflow of doing things. But
For sure.
yeah, so do you have any of your own things like that you haven't learned from others, but
Created on my own.
yeah, yeah.
Well, it doesn't necessarily just kind of like spontaneously pop up in terms of like a lesson or method of teaching. It always stems from something that was already established. Like for instance, when Norm was teaching the class, he would use a lot of the similar exercises that we're talking about now, but it was actually not as well. It was communicated very well, but I've had to then alter the way I had to communicate it too, and then through the differing of communication, it alters the way I do it too. So a lot of ways, what happens, it becomes more of a customized version of what it was beforehand. So even like this exercise right here, what Norm would do is like we have 5 shapes, combine them together, and that's he would like tell us overlap, cutaway, intersect. That was it, and then from there he wouldn't tell us anything beyond just problem solve, figure it out. So for me, it's like I really wanted to find another way to explain it so that students would look at me like understanding what the hell I was talking about. So I had to find a method of like saying, okay, we're using a method now combining these shapes, and we're gonna make sure that as we overlap, we gotta look for the right areas of right points to know what to look for. What do these points actually mean? They can be arbitrary, but knowing where to then place them and then being able to draw through will hopefully then get the proper exercise done. But it was more about that. It was about taking something that was already an exercise and being able to either add to it or adjust it based on communication to make it even stronger for people to understand and understand also the use of it in long-term sense. Being able to do stuff like this over here with the fish. So that's the way it's kind of been with education for me, is that a lot of these lessons were definitely already in place. And how I explain it another way is that what I'm doing is an echo of Norm. And so what you're hearing right now is an echo of his lesson, but it's not a direct imitation of it, because that was one of my first mistakes in teaching when Norm passed away in 2010. I started my first class at Art Center, and the biggest mistake I made was I thought to myself, how would he explain this? And how would he draw this? What would he say in the situation? And because of that mindset, I was always nervous. I was always very anxious, and I wasn't quite sure I was good enough to do this, because in my mind, I was always comparing to like what Norm would do. And he had very big shoes to fill. So when that was happening, I realized after about a year of teaching that way that it wasn't really working. I wasn't not only was I not enjoying it, but I felt like the students were seeing that it wasn't really me up there, you know.
Yeah.
So going to that kind of almost like a puppet, just kind of acting out something. It wasn't very intimate. It wasn't very inclusive. It wasn't very personal. And so after a year and then going into the second year, I started realizing I had to start finding other ways of communicating it where the essence of it, his formula was there, but I had to now continue finding my ways of explaining things. So what I tell students that are going to teach it on themselves, like I have students that are teaching right now, like a CGMA or CDA, and they have their versions of what this class is too. And I have them, try to explain it, and then they would pursue their own ways of communication.
Yeah, well, that's a thing of confidence, I believe, and I think like all the teachers go through the same phase.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you're trying to stay humble in a way, and then it's not easy to be like confident of what you're teaching when it's your first day of teaching stuff, right?
For sure.
So I guess like it's a normal thing. Do you still learn? Are you following any other teachers? Let's call them teachers. Do you go like through some tutorials or that kind of stuff?
I haven't, but the thing is, I would not mind doing so. And a lot of this has become more of a time factor, if anything else. And my own pursuits and me doing my own personal stuff is a learning experience as well. But I think the learning is also in different areas. The learning hasn't become so much technical per se in drawing or painting, but it's definitely more become like learning about, branding or entrepreneurship or about, getting your business started and developing products, like making books and stuff like that was a big learning experience myself, like being able to deal with a printer and knowing what they need and how to like organize all that information. So that was a huge aspect of it for sure.
Let me check. I know we had like at least 2 questions here. So first one was, what do you think is a good balance between studying and doing things for you should be? Like, what would be the good balance? This is for someone that draws every day for 2 hours.
Well, first, I would say drawing every day for 2 hours is not enough, honestly. When you're talking about hours in time, we can start that way first. We gotta set a number. Like, if you have an idea of what a certain student does, let's say in a full-time degree, then you can kind of position yourself in a sense like, okay, obviously I'm not a full-time student, but I can see what they're doing, and I can then adjust my scheduling and balance better from that. But at an art center school, a typical student with a full-time class, full load would be about 4 classes, and that would be about 4 studio classes, maybe 1 academic class. And the studio classes are 14 weeks, 5 hours long each, and they're all very intensive classes too. The academic is just some kind of academic lesson of English or math or whatever the case is. Anyways, a typical student with a full load will go about 60 hours minimum of drawing and painting, and that's in a week amount of time. So obviously, a full-time job is about a 40-hour week. So 60 hours is about baseline for many students at Art Center. Some will push more, 100 hours, maybe more from there. But that's pretty much you're stressing the limits of how far you can take it. For myself personally, when I was a student, I was definitely drawing upwards of that, 60 plus, going into the 80, 90 hours range. You're working so often every single day to the point where you're up 24/7 sometimes. I mean, the longest I've ever stayed up during college at Art Center was about 3 days straight. 3 days straight going to a class, working, staying up, working, going to class. It was constant. It was horrible, and I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. But it was just something I had to do at that current moment because I had to get things done.
Was this like self motivated, or the teachers were actually after you? Like
It was a lot of it was self motivated, but then also motivated by the competition of other friends and students too. So seeing that around me, and of course the deadline looming over you, is something that was a huge part of my pursuit. So yeah, we pushed each other very heavily. We were always jealous and envious of the students that were able to get all their work done very timely, and not having to stay up all night, and you can get some sleep as well. But most of us had to. But anyways, going back to the balance of it. So if you understand that a student at full time, like at Art Center, is doing 60 hours in a week, well, first, what's your position? What are you doing right now? And many students are probably going to be working part time, full time jobs, just day to day kind of thing. Some of them might be students in other fields as well. So you're talking about maybe a 40-hour week just working. You should be able to pursue an additional 20 hours in a week of just drawing, being able to draw. So you take 20 hours and divide that, maybe like 5 days. That should be a baseline number. Baseline. Now, the other part of the question then is, if I just drew that, then every single day, let's say I was drawing even like 5, 6 hours every day or more, will I benefit from that? And I will say that, yeah, you can. You will definitely grow with just a constant effort of hours of drawing. The problem is of the drive, right? That constant energy. Are you able to upkeep it, and can you balance it where you know how to then recoup from that stress? Because many students will push, 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 and they'll get to a breaking point. And they break themselves, and then they burn out, and they hit a wall, and then they can't do anything afterwards. They don't want to draw. They don't want to create. It's like, I'm done. I'm burnt out. And they've built a lot of anxiety also of being able to create after that point. So I think the balance of it is finding a stress point where you are stressing, where you know it's hard and challenging, and trying to push that, but then recognizing where your breaking point is also, and not being able to go past that, and stopping, relaxing, doing something else, but also understanding that education is more than just like what I'm doing right now, just sketching and drawing. Education is also the life experience, like getting out there and doing things with your friend, watching movies, experiencing stuff outside, getting to, traveling, if anything else. Those learning experiences are just as powerful, if not more so, than the actual act of physically drawing too, because you're stimulating all that experience and growth of story, of interacting with other people, of visualizing many things. So even if I'm out there traveling and whatnot, that doesn't mean that my brain isn't on. Even if I'm not physically drawing, in my mindset, I'm actually breaking things down constantly, even subconsciously. So I'm always adding to my visual vocabulary constantly because of it. So, and I don't feel guilty about that. I don't feel guilty if I'm like, oh, I should be drawing or working right now. But I kind of want to work on
You mean
stuff.
you're like observing things around you and analyzing
Yeah,
perspective, color, texture?
exactly. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it can be almost spontaneous, like an inspirational moment, or it could be an actual focused thought. It's like, oh, that's an interesting thing. I want to look at that and maybe take pictures of it and think about, well, how would I approach this? What would I do in this situation? Um, Again, the thinking and the focusing of it is what's really draining for many, many people. But that's why you have to kind of be able to press, pull back, bend it really hard, and strengthen it, temper it, and then being able to stress more after you really build, the fortitude of being able to take that kind of stress. And it does take years to a potential degree. So I think that's, I guess, a good way to think about it, is that you want to push and stress, and you can draw hours and hours every day, but you do want to balance it out of being able to then absorb it, and then being able to really think about what you were trying to do in the first place. Because some students will go from term after term, class after class, and I think one of the problems in the curriculum in places like Art Center is that they'll learn all these skills, and they go into a term and they don't really understand how to use them because they haven't had the time to really sit there and think about what they were doing. They're kind of following a deadline and a curriculum and a path, and they just have to get things done. And by the time they move into their break in the next term, they're recouped, but then now they're focusing on something else. And sometimes the classes don't necessarily bridge together well. Like if you're doing one term of drawing heavily, perspective and figure drawing and observational sketching, another term they think about, I now want to do painting. I've done drawing, I want to do painting now. But they don't really use the drawing into the painting side because the lessons or the methods don't really convey clearly for some, and they don't understand the connections to them either. So they think of them as separate or compartmentalized things, and they don't bridge it over and from one aspect to the other. So when it comes to balancing that aspect of it, yeah, I mean, think about what I just mentioned about this number of hours that a student will do, but then from there, being able to account for your personal life and what you're doing currently, and then being able to break that up well within the week. But you do have to plan it, and a lot of people like to say, like, they keep it in their minds, like, I'll just kind of deal with it day by day, but that creates a lot of procrastination eventually, and you get lost. You get lost into it.
So I guess this is like for some individuals, it can be like really hard period in their life, especially young people. I mean, we who are older, we know already if you're burned in some period, you know that
Yeah.
later on when you get some rest, then
Hmm.
things will be again as they were, but
Yeah.
maybe for someone who is experiencing this for the first time, it can mean, in his head or her head, it can mean like, oh, this is the end, I can't do it anymore,
Yeah.
like it's so yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah,
So
that plateau, or there's even that mindset when students will go into a class where they think by taking a class once they can absorb all the information they need, and by doing so they can then say, I've taken it, I don't need it again, and they're going to move on to some other class. And for me, when I explain my classes, is in this way: it's, you're not really beginning the work while you're in class. You're really only understanding the mindset and the methods, and the real work begins when the class is done. And when you finish, are you able to maintain that same focus and discipline without having to have some sort of schedule or curriculum to follow, or even people around you at a certain case? Because many people that are out there might have education, but they're like online classes, but that's surrounded by a lot of people. They're just kind of by themselves. And that is a very difficult way to approach it. But again, those disciplines and methods of working can be first learned in a classroom, but you got to be able to really use it afterwards, or else it's lost. It's easily just as lost. And it's very frustrating for many people that way.
the thing that you're drawing right now, I guess this is related to the question here by Danny.
Yes.
So he
Yes.
asked, can you please talk or demonstrate your thought process about textures and details on combined primitive shapes? So,
Well, so what I'm doing right now is a system of bars that will have some sort of surface information inside them. And I'm doing them on a flat surface because I'm not thinking about three dimensions or proportion or form, but I'm thinking more just on a flat plane. Information. Sorry. And so I want to keep it more towards just the line and being able to then gradate from one side to the other to show a spectrum of value. So I'm thinking of gradation at this point as well. And I'll do a variance amount of surfaces. And you can do it through observation. You can look at actual surfaces, or you can look at them at photographs and textures. You can make some of them up if you want to as well. And then we would take, let's say, a primitive form, whether it's a very abstract shape or if it's going to be a primitive construction form, let's say like boxes that are combined together. And being able to then use that information of texture to apply on top of. So with this one, let's actually put this here. And plug in this kind of texture information on top of something. So if I take this texture and apply it into this abstract form, a lot of the things we do first is being able to understand where we place it, and then of course how we place it. The first thing is really understanding your light source and being able to discern your shadows and lights. So we might have, let's say, like a form shadow here, maybe you'll have like a cast shadow there, and then I also understand the surfacing of it has already been studied. So this is the surface, and it's like a rocky form, rocky surface. So I can take that information now and plug it into this object, and this object has a form shadow, but the thing is, when students are just kind of left to their own devices, they tend to kind of texture or put information of detail everywhere through the entire thing. And in a drawing method, it's all about what you don't show. So you give enough information to the viewer and the audience and let the viewer fill in the rest of the gaps. So you let them do the work. So you have to only just do so much. And that creates efficiency, that creates speed. And being fast is not about just drawing quickly. It's about knowing what you want to put in there and making decisions. So here, I'm able to decide the fact that I know I have a rocky texture. I can place it within the area of shadow groupings, and I can intensify those details in the focal point and just give enough information to the viewer so they understand what I'm trying to convey. And if there are areas where I don't really detail as much, they understand what's going on and they can fill in those gaps for me. So right now, I'm taking that exact same approach and applying it into the form shadow area, the darkest darks inside that spot, and I use line hatching, compressions of lines, overlapping lines to kind of get that value pumped up, using these kind of patterns of geoforms to represent rock-like structures, and that way I can convey this idea that even the silhouette can even break up, that this is covered in this kind of textural form. So again, like I said, if I saw this in observation, I would be able to quickly break down a method of knowing how I can take that information and place it onto the page, where I don't have to sit there and overanalyze and overthink about, oh my god, that's so much information, I don't know how to interpret this stuff, and then you get intimidated and you overwork it also too. So at the moment, I'm just kind of like placing in a little bit of indication of that stuff, and that's really one of the main words too, is indication. Being able to indicate that information is about, again, decision making, making choices as to what you want.
So, like, during some session of an observational drawing,
Yeah.
where you have like something that's like really complex, it's not so, maybe it's not so important, you know, to for example, if it has like many similar details of which some are like medium, some are small, and some are like
Yeah,
big
yeah.
in size. It is only important to like to let your brain understand that, you know, I have like 10% of those and 20% of those and 70% of those, and so from that point on, after you realize where the light is coming from, you can actually just make the thing in front of you by not copying it exactly, right?
Right, right. So again, what we're doing is an interpretation. We're filtering the information of observation in front of us. So if you only copied it, then you're trying to draw what's in front of you as a representation, and it becomes more of an illustration where what we're trying to do is break down to create a visual language. And once we understand a visual language, we know how to then communicate to others through this form. And that's one of the key differences between a class like this and an illustration class, where if you're doing still life studies of value and color or drawing, you're trying to draw the exact thing as you see in front, and being able to, again, transfer that information over. But here, yeah, that's an aspect of it, but also you're very much in control of being able to communicate what you want to communicate. So if my thoughts are, I want to communicate the accuracy of proportion, but I really don't want to get into a lot of details because that's not my focus, then you can do so. Even right now, I can say I want to create a focus in terms of what I want to show you in this area. Everything else outside of that area of focus, I'm just going to maybe show a silhouette and maybe a slight indication of it, but I don't necessarily have to fill that in. And you might think, but that feels unfinished. Well, I'm trying to communicate an area of it so that way you can understand what's going on, and this is a quick sketch for me to absorb that information so I can use it later on with more finesse or refinement, because there is nothing wrong with over-rendering or finishing a drawing to a completion of an illustration or whatever the case is, but my pursuit is very much different right now.
I have another question here.
Yeah.
When it comes to figure gesture drawing, are 120 60 pose a good and fast way to improve?
The 120 and 60, I'm assuming that's like the degree.
I can't tell. I'm
Yeah.
amateur here.
Yeah, if you're talking about like the degree of the angle, like a 3/4 view or like a certain, I'm not sure if you're talking about time either, if it's like a certain amount of time to put into a drawing. But if you're talking about gestures of pose, then of course the pose of it needs to be figured out first. Do you understand your proportions of the human being? So you start with a lot of anatomy study initially. So you got to know your proportions really well. So studying anatomy, muscle, bone can be a good thing, but also the other side of proportion is understanding it through shape. So I can study the human arm using just primitive shapes, using cylinders and spheres, and still get a representation of the human arm very well. But then from that, I can then maybe place it. Well, I can also understand muscle groupings. We have a bicep, tricep, brachialis, and all those muscle groups. From there, then the pose has to be then pushed, and the pose. Okay, so minutes. Yes, you're talking about time. So time-wise, if you're talking about specifically on that, first I would say short poses. You're talking about like 5-minute poses and 10-minute poses. But if you're doing like an hour-long pose and such, those are not really going to be for gesture and figure sketching or drawing. But you're talking about doing like a full illustration or study of that model. So then things like lighting, value, texture, surfacing patterns, all that stuff comes into play, and you're looking for something refined. But if you're looking for figure and gesture drawing, you gotta limit those times to a much shorter degree. When it comes to timing, also, I kind of think about it in two different ways. One is that you can think of timing like in figure drawing, where you have a 5-minute pose, and that's the beginning to end, and then you change another drawing. But I also have another method of using timing, which is using it as a checkpoint. So let's say let's say not even a model, live model, you're looking at a photograph of a model, and you're doing a time session. So instead of setting 5 minutes to begin to draw and finish drawing, what you should do is set up a timer to be at a checkpoint. So begin to draw for 5 minutes and stop, but at a checkpoint, ask yourself questions at the end of that time. What are you trying to do? What was the intention of the drawing? Did you accomplish what you set out to do, right? And at that point, if you feel like I can still add a bit more of this, add another 5 minutes and keep drawing. So the idea is that you don't get lost into it. You don't spend too much time, like an hour, what it's supposed to be a gesture drawing, right?
So here we actually see what you were explaining before, like how to use those basic shapes for drawing arm.
Yeah.
We have like cylinders mostly, and then here we have like some kind of boxes
Right.
and whatnot. So okay, so when we talk about the arm, it's mostly cylinders. When we talk about head, there's a combination of
Yes.
sphere and box and whatnot. What about torso? Like, what kind of shape is that?
I mean, the torso has always been explained very simply by a lot of artists with this concept of the pillowcase, which is this kind of like stretched and compressed form.
Or the bean. I've heard of bean.
The bean, yeah, and the bean shape is another part of it too, where you can actually compress a bean and you get this kind of like torso-like shape, where it represents the top of the torso, the shoulders down to the oblique and the hips areas. And so that's a good method to begin with, but the idea of proportion is one of the more finicky things, because you can start with the shape, but can you proportion it accurately? And of course, observation is one of the key things. You just have to look at the figure and the subject matter and be able to translate that object over. And a lot of students are asking me questions of, I'm looking for a measurement system, an accurate way to like just get things down. But the measuring system is coming from your eye also. You just have to be able to observe it accurately and transfer that information down to the page. But a lot of times what I start with before I even do this is, even before a shape, is actually even just lines. So I can represent the top of the shoulder and, let's say, a gesture of a spine and movement. And so I can then think about the distance between these two spaces using a line, because if I mess this up, I can adjust it easier. I can make the line longer, or I can make it shorter. But if I started with the shape, you're committed to that shape, and it's really difficult to adjust the form and correct it. So when you mess it up, you're like, oh man, that doesn't look correct. Or if you don't even realize it, you move forward with a drawing, and because you weren't adjusting as you went along, it shows up later on, like, oh my god, that proportion was wrong, I didn't even realize. But if I can maybe simplify that process of thinking by saying, I just want to start with lines initially, maybe even like draw through a little bit. I can say that this is maybe where the rib cage is connected to, maybe this is where the actual where's the dip of the collarbone is, and also where the hips are connected to. Then I can maybe connect these forms together, like connecting the dots in a way, right? After the fact. And then being able to attach additional parts and pieces, where like the shoulder, going into the trapezius, up into the sternocleidomastoid, and all those other muscle forms, going to the shape, and then getting 3 dimensions by wrapping a wireframe around it. But I started with just a line to help me understand a gesture of a movement. Maybe it's like this way, and he's maybe stretching this direction. Maybe his chest is up here, compressing that side down to the hips. But a lot of it is also the constant practice and observation just by seeing the figure in the model, and then getting used to those placements and landmarks. Yeah.
I think it's pretty good to practice on maybe dancers.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I think that even Scott Eaton had this library of bodies in motion or something like that. So I guess this is like a good practice.
Yeah.
So must-have books, literature. Do you have any suggestions there related to things that we have discussed in this session?
Sure. I mean, one of the books I always like to recommend is the Framed Ink book, right? And I'm sure a lot of people
We
recommend that
mentioned
one,
that,
and
yeah.
oh, many times I'm sure. And I do recommend that one highly because he's covering many grounds of perspective, composition, those, specific areas. But Framed Ink in terms of process and learning educationally, I would say that's a really good area. There are so many books on like figure drawing, anatomy, and perspective, and it's really hard to sift through all that information. There is a specific book that I also like to recommend in my class, which is called Rapid Viz.
I haven't heard about this one.
And Rapid Viz is a very classical book. Comes from like the 1970s or 80s. And Norm used to also recommend this book for our class because it's a very strong Viscom method of drawing. It has its origins within architectural form, but it can be used in terms of what we're doing in our class also. So it uses a lot of the basic kind of like exercises on line and shapes and a little bit on perspective, but it has a lot of great techniques. So it's a little bit classic. It feels a little bit dated for some people, but I think the information in there is very, very rich and gold mine if anything else, and it's one that a lot of people don't really know about, and I only just recommend it. So
Okay, I already found it on Amazon. I think.
Yeah,
I think that's
yeah.
the one. And it's really rated well, so I guess.
It is, yeah. It's a good one. So Rapid Viz was one of them. Another book I could probably recommend would, I mean, of course, we just talked about Scott's book, and I think Scott's book comes into place within a certain timeline of your experience. It wouldn't be necessarily the best thing to start with, but it does come into a play at a certain point. Of course, the book I produce is definitely one I would always like to like promote and pitch and all that kind of stuff. But it's one of those where a book like mine was self-published. So I'm the one doing everything from the looking for the printer, distributing it, selling it, having it shipped. So it's a massive amount of work, and I don't necessarily get to produce a very high number of them. So they can be a little bit harder to find for a lot of people because it's not a widely published book or anything like that. But that information, if anybody can find it, can be useful because essentially it's a collection of all my lecture notes I'm doing right now.
What's the name? What's the name of the book?
Dynamic Bible.
Dynamic Bible. So is it available through Amazon or?
It's available through my own website, through my Shopify account. So I have a Shopify account that I use.
Can
It's
you
just
just
Peter Hunt style.
can you just like write it on the canvas here so
Yeah, of course.
we have it for good?
And this is where you can find this book on here, and it's available. It's actually in stock right now. I have it there on my website. So when I take the orders, my printer out in Korea actually is the one that ships it out to people internationally. So it's available international right now. But I'm only down to like maybe 200 copies left after a couple thousand that I had done a run for. The book I think is going to go through a bit of a redesign, and I haven't really announced anything just for it yet. But we have plans for stuff in the future under Super Ronnie.
So how did Super Rani happen? I know. I mean, those guys are at first they were really a group of Asian artists around the brand, but later on I've seen even some European artists are now part of the
absolutely.
Super Rani. And
Yes.
how did you get in touch with them? And
Well, Super Ronnie started with the two artists, Kim Jung-gi and Hyunjin Kim. And Hyunjin is the guy with the long, kind of like grayed hair, and obviously everybody knows Kim Jung-gi. But those guys, started, they were doing a lot of classes and teaching. And from teaching, they had their own students, and they started their own brand and art group, essentially, they called Super Ronnie. So a lot of their initial starts of people were their students at first, and then they started to venture out and started getting other artists that were international, and they become more of a global team now, where before it was specifically Korean artists. I've heard about Kim Jung-gi through YouTube and many years ago, and we were introduced to each other. And what happened really, the main connector was the U.S. manager here in California who runs his brand in the U.S. And she actually was a close friend, but also from Art Center. We went to Art Center together. So we would go to like Comic Cons and stuff like that. And I would see her. Would say we'd say hi and we'd catch up, and she would introduce me to all the people there. So that was a starting point of just being introduced to the team of Super Ronnie. And that was the way it was for years, going to different shows. And I had never had any pursuits of wanting to join them per se. It was more like, oh, that's their stuff, and they're doing amazing, and they're growing substantially. And I was just still pursuing my own thing, my education, and the books I was producing on my own. But I think after a number of years of getting closer and becoming relatively friends with the group, that conversation eventually came up. Like we should think about maybe you want to come aboard and do this kind of thing, because they were, again, continuing to grab a lot of international people, and guys like Nicholas Namiri, he's based out in Hong Kong but from France, and we have Karl Kopinski from the UK. All these guys are now starting to be picked up right now too, that are notable, but from different fields too, like animation, and now they're going to comics and illustration work, and education. So for me, I think I fit well because they were looking for, I think, that educational aspect of it, where a lot of their art books are mostly just art books. There's really no strong educational value. So I think I kind of fit that pocket a little bit with some of the other people that are grabbing it now at the moment, and that's the way it started.
Okay, so this is a bit forwarding things into the future, because what we are talking about obviously happens later on in a career.
Yeah.
But what is the advantage of joining such group? Like, what's the most important thing for you? Like, why was this thing
Yeah.
that you say yes to?
So for me, and they asked that very question to me also. They said, "Well, what can we do for you? What if you join Super Ronnie, what?" It's not about what I could bring, but they were more interested in what they could offer me. And as I thought about it, it's like, well, why do I want to join Super Ronnie? What would be the benefit of that? And I think there's several for sure. The one is obvious. It's the distribution, it's the reach to the people that are out there. And because Kim Jung-gi is prolific, and he's definitely one of the masters out there, definitely an individual of this time and generation that people remember. And he has millions of people that he reaches out to, and I can take a part in that to be able to pursue the things that I want to be able to reach out to as well for people, using their platforms, and being able to partner up like this. I think only benefits not only me, but then also for them, because I'm able to offer something hopefully that they're not able to just cover. I'm hoping in that sense that they don't have, but also beyond that is that community. It's that coming together.
Well, first of all, you speak English. Well, he doesn't, so I guess.
And that's the huge thing. Like, I'm sure if people watch his workshops and he's talking about his process, I'm sure for a lot of people they will look at it, and for them it's like an alien language with it goes right over the head. The visual part, I mean, it's like, it's not even the Korean, but I'm talking about his visuals are so advanced that even the people that are well experienced look at it and be like, I don't know how he does it.
Yeah. But this is the thing. I think even I won't compare you with him for the obvious reasons why. It doesn't matter. But the thing is, you and him are like really different persons. You're like really good at passing knowledge.
Sure.
While I guess it's much easier for you to learn from his drawings than it would be from for a beginning artist, a beginning student.
Sure.
And you have this knowledge to pass knowledge to others.
Right. Exactly.
So I guess every such group has, like, every individual in every such group has like their advantages and their like special superpowers.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what they're doing. I mean, they're essentially collecting as best they can the best of the best that are out there.
Yeah.
Just so they have this massive, great team, and again, for them, it is about the people. It is about helping others. It's about coming together and really enjoying what we're doing and pursuing the things that we want to pursue. And that's one of the things they told me is like, we're not here to like have you be a part of a team through a contract, but you're just part of Super Ronnie, and we just want you to create. And that's what they said to me. And that's the kind of group and community I've always wanted to be a part of, and this idea that I can not only pursue but then grow with them, because obviously these kinds of artists are massively, incredibly skilled, and they inspire me in terms of like the pursuits that they go for. And so whether I'm trying to match up to that, but at the very least I'm trying to match up to their pursuits of their goals.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I think I really like this concept. I wish I was that skilled that at some point in my life I just decided to go for it, like maybe 20 years ago. And because I really like this concept, it reminds me so much of my times in graffiti,
Sure.
because like traveling, meeting people, who are like admire your skill set or whatever, and also hanging, with friends who do art, who just draw.
Yeah.
Like you go to a dinner, like everyone is drawing, and
And that's the thing. It's like we're just friends now too. It's not so business oriented as well. It's like for their thoughts are not about making lots of money. For them, there's like they just want to excel in their creative outlets, and they're using then a group of people to help push that to reach as many as they can, and also using books and print and education to do so as well. So it's a very, very positive group. and one that people might imagine that, these are the best of the best. You might think, how would I break into something like that? But really, what they're trying to do is set an example that you should just start your own thing. Become that of your own, if anything else. There's no reason that you couldn't.
So we're already like more than 1 hour and a half in the session, and I mean it's time to finish it. But
Oh,
we
fast.
always, like I always think about young people who are like listening to us. So because they're the ones, I mean, even us older folks are like full of doubts,
Yeah, of course.
about life and stuff. But for those young people, like who like are unsure, maybe what will happen tomorrow. Will they get this job and whatnot? Do you have any final message, any suggestions, and maybe any advice on art practice or anything like that?
Well, it's all about the mental state, and one of the things I like to usually finish within a classroom, and I will sometimes bring this up in a lecture when I go travel as well. But it's an example of how I think now compared to how I thought when I was a student. When I was a student drawing, my mentality when I sketched anything from people, stuff like this, or shapes, it was that this platform or this piece of paper or digital file or any material that I was using was my enemy. It was actually something I was fighting against. And I thought that in a very aggressive mindset because I wanted to control it. I wanted to defeat it. And if I was able to control it and defeat it and have it under me, then I could use it any way I want to. So it was a very aggressive mindset because I was constantly in drawing because as I pursued and tried to grip it tighter, I felt like I was getting more of it, more of it. But then 9 times out of 10, those drawings would defeat me. It would not come out the way I would want to, and I would get frustrated. I would get angry. And again, like I said, it was a very stressful way of thinking. And the more I thought that way, it was actually very toxic, and it fed into many things. Where I wasn't going out, I wasn't hanging out with friends, I really wasn't doing anything else except just locking myself in a room and just drawing as much as possible, but in a seething, kind of like, very negative way. So the way I have an analogy to that is that it was a fight that I was just constantly in battle with the pursuit of perfection in a way. And then afterwards, after a number of years of being out of school and then teaching and getting involved with communities and stuff like that, my mind completely altered. And then of course, the passing of Norm, and I have previous experiences like losses of family and whatnot. It made me realize that I can't just stress over this stuff anymore. I just really enjoy the method of what I'm going for. And the analogy that I have now that it's not really a fight, but it's actually a dance. And in the educational method, you're learning steps, you're learning processes, and when you learn those rules and steps, you can always then be creative outside of it. You can work outside of it, you can move outside of it, and you can express the way you want to. So then the process was more interesting to me than the end result. So this drawing that I'm doing right now, I don't care about the way it looks. I'm more interested in actually having fun with doing it at the moment, and it is fun. So no matter how it comes out, I'm always going to enjoy it. I'm always going to be able to look back on it and be like, yeah, it was a great drawing because the experience of doing it, of being able to talk to you and the people that are around me was what makes it very interesting. So the technical part of it then goes out the window, and then there's no more stress, and then there's no more anxiety, and then I can keep drawing. I can actually draw for hours without feeling like, oh, I have no more energy to draw anymore. I mean, I draw constantly, and I never had this thought of like, I can't get up and draw anymore. I never had those thoughts. So I'm hoping that people can really start mentally first, internally, and then go there and have it feed into their technical aspects of it. Because if you can find a complete dedication and interest into it with the passion and enjoyment, then you're never going to hit a wall. And up to this point, after 10, 15 years of working and teaching, I have never hit a wall. I've never got to the point like, I can't draw today. I get up thinking drawing. I sleep drawing. So the creation aspect of it is completely enveloped. And I tell people, out of my students, like, even if I wasn't making money and even if I was homeless on the streets in California, I would still be drawing on the streets. Honestly, it's to that level of dedication. And the one thing that has to, I kind of like, I try to not really scare people, but kind of wake them up a little bit, is that if I am able to invest myself to this level of degree into my pursuit, you have to understand there are other people out there, like guys like Kim Jong-gi, that push even more than I do, and they're on a level that are even on a different stratosphere. And that I look at that, and a lot of people get scared. They're like, "Oh my God, I'll never reach that." But in my mind, is I'm glad there are guys like out there like him, because I want them to be successful, and I want him to be doing better than me, because that in pursuit is going to push me to try to be just as good as him. So it's not a defeating mindset, it's not a negative mindset, but it's more like I want those people to succeed, because then it really shows me that I can also follow something as well. So when I teach, I tell people I'm training you to be better than me, because if I can train you to be better in terms of what I'm doing, I'm going to try to push myself to be better than you. So it's that constant upping of the bar to become as best as you can in the limited time that we have. And that I'm very conscious of my mortality, so I'm trying to take advantage of every moment that I have in them, and the times that I'm able to create or be with people. And that's really the huge thing. The mental aspect of it is what feeds into everything else.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I always say this. It's really a privilege to be an artist, because not everyone can, and it's one of
Oh yeah,
those
for sure.
one of those rare, like jobs, if you're doing it for money, where you're
Hmm.
actually doing something that you did as a kid as well,
Yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
enjoy it the same way. And
Hmm.
I guess we all get like really obsessed when we're like developing something new, and we go to
Right.
sleep with it and we wake up with it, and I think, I mean, you know everyone, of course, has to pay for their bills and everything, and
Of
this is
course. Yeah.
like a normal thing. And I can totally understand with the young folks, because I have the same problems. I have sometimes, I
Hmm.
have periods when I'm like, oh shit, like again, like no money again,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
but then again, then you still have this kingdom of your own, of your imagination, where you can just pick the paper and a pencil, and start creating. It's a kind of a meditation for your mind and your soul, so
Yeah. For sure.
and not many people out there can say that, if you're selling, I don't know, like stocks or something,
Yeah.
you don't go to your bed thinking about, oh, like my beautiful stocks, and
Yeah.
it's a different thing. So I think like we should be happy that we have this opportunity to,
Oh, for sure.
to create,
And that's the thing, is that you can actually affect people. You can change lives with it. So.
especially in your situation when you're like the teacher,
Hmm.
who really does that, who really
Yeah.
changes people's life.
Oh, cool.
Okay, Peter. Everyone, really hope to see you at the event, and where you can like nag Peter, asking questions. And Peter, don't worry, people don't do that actually, at
Oh no,
the
I want them to. Trust me. When I'm doing shows and events, I am on for the entire event. I'll do my talk, but then I'm working for the entire time. I do reviews and
Okay,
portfolio review, 24/7. I'll
okay.
be up till 3 a.m. doing that with people. So.
Okay, I guess around 3 a.m. you'll be like really, really wasted, but you never
That's
know.
good too. It's always fun.
Okay,
Absolutely.
everyone, thanks so much for joining us. Peter, thanks a lot,
No,
and
thank you.
we'll be online soon, in 2 days with the Jama Revive.
Awesome.
And yeah, that's it. We'll be in touch. Peter, also, if you ever want to do something like this again, I'm saying this publicly, just let me know. We will do it. I really enjoyed talking to you, and
Absolutely.
obviously, we can really learn a lot from you. So,
Fantastic.
uh,
Thank you, Marco.
yeah, that was it.
Okay.
I'll stop streaming now, and yeah,
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
see you all soon. Okay. Okay.